last 2 hour long bike and pedestrian task force meeting, I think, of the year. But before I get into all the business, James Hennig, our staff assistant from DPW, I think has some housekeeping he wants to share with all of you. Take it away, James.
Yeah, thank you. I keep wondering if housekeeping is a politically correct term anymore. I'm gonna have to do some digging into that. I just wanted to first say thanks for everyone who's able to join. And I just wanted to let people know that I did hit recording, so just please know that this will be recorded, mostly for note-taking purposes, which is a benefit for me. Then also, one or two of the agenda items tonight will probably involve breakout groups, which I'll admit, there's the potential for some technical difficulties, but we have experimented a little bit, so it should work. But just know that if you're joining on phone, that we won't be able to break you into a room. So I apologize ahead that you might not be able to participate. But if you can stay in the main room, we can kind of keep you engaged if you plan on sticking around. And then, just please remember to keep yourself muted. And I think right now we have a pretty manageable size group, but if you do want to share something with the group or ask a question, please use the raise hand function or type into the chat box, and I'll be kind of monitoring that throughout and helping Caressa and Kevin and crew kind of answer and navigate those conversations. And with that, unless there are kind of any questions right off the bat, kind of from a technical side, I would kind of just, ask Caressa to start, or we can start with roll call. And, I guess I would ask you, Caressa, we didn't really do this with the last meeting, but we could just run through the members and just kind of say, the person can kind of just say present. And then if you'd like, we could do introductions as well. It looks like we have 23 people at this point, which is fine. Yeah. So, if that's the case, then I think we could I could just mention who's on the call, and then that will just help in terms of keeping notes and keeping track. Angie's kind of giving a thumbs up, but I'll give it to the chair to make sure. But yeah.
Yeah, why don't you just go through the list or mention what's on the call from the member group, and also I know that we've kind of been back and forth a little bit about onboarding new members, and I'd actually like to get a little bit of update from you on that before we start, before we approve minutes.
Okay, sounds good. All right, well, we'll start with roll call then. So I'll start with members. I'm just going to go in the order. It's generally alphabetical, but it's a mix of whether it's last name or first name. So Caressa.
Present.
Claude.
I'm here too.
All right, Kevin.
Present.
Nicholas.
Hey, present.
Thank you. Angie.
Accounted for.
All right. I think that's all the members we have. Let me know if I missed anyone. And then I'll just mention everyone who's on and just kind of, this will be kind of for the notes, but, feel free if you want. You can also kind of mention yourself in the chat, and if you're representing an organization, if you'd like, just so that we kind of know who we're talking with. So Mike Amsden, Angela Vicchio, Brian Peters, Cheryl Blue, Cynthia Telez, John B, Jose, Kathy, and I think that's Kathy Brengos, Mitch Henke, Paul Williams, Rebecca Rabatten, Kate Reardon, Bob Schneider, Sarah Brigant, Wesley Hempton, and Willie Caritas. And I think I noticed at least one person on the phone. So I guess if you'd like to introduce yourself, please do.
Sure. Bob Dumpkin, I'm just here to listen in today.
That's great. Thank you for joining us.
All right. Thank you. So next, I believe we need to approve the minutes from last meeting. So do we have an approval or a second, I should say.
I think I saw Angie saying something maybe, or leaning in.
Yeah, I motion to accept the minutes.
Okay, excellent. Well, so I just wanted to say that I believe that the meetings that we will have ongoing, which will be monthly, are going to be very much rooted in working group meetings. Some of you know that we're on a path to try to reinvigorate this group, and some hard work, big work needs to be done to do that. And I think it's really exciting, but you will most likely find the structure of these meetings moving forward in a way that contributes to the sort of redevelopment of this group. And that's in part, and also in part, you will learn about upcoming opportunities, things that are going on in the city, how to get involved, etc. But I think I can say on behalf of many people who've been around this group for a while that we do need a little bit of brushing up. And so if you have the agenda at hand and you look at it, you will notice that there are a couple of things related to the development or redevelopment of group. And then we've got some things that are just going on at the city. And I think that there's also some ways that people on this call can get involved, which is really important, right? Instead of just hearing about things and not knowing what to do with them. So what I wanted to do is I really wanted to invite Willie Caritas, who is a representative of Rails to Trails, and also Cheryl Blue from the 30th Street Corridor to talk a little bit more about this preliminary feasibility study regarding the development of the 30th Street Corridor Trail, but also speak to the really important development that must be done in the future to ensure jobs and health and wealth, especially for that predominant African American community there. So Willie, I don't know if you need anything or if anyone has any questions for me, but I'd love to just jump into this and hear from you on what's going on.
Thank you, Carissa. Hey, I'd like to share my screen just to give you a little bit of background. First of all, it's good to see so many familiar faces, and it's been too long. So I'm just going to share my screen here. And let's see here. Okay. Maybe this. Are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
Yes, we're seeing your team's kind of
Okay.
page.
So you see my cursor, and so what I'm going to talk about is the 30th Street Corridor. This is the Route of the Badger map. The orange line that runs north-south.
Willie, I'm just going to stop you right now. I don't see that map.
Oh, you
for some
don't?
reason. Do other people not see that?
Yeah,
We're seeing your Facebook page, Willie.
No, we're seeing your Microsoft Teams like chat.
Oh yeah, it's a Microsoft Teams with a Facebook on it. Log in Facebook.
All right.
Willie, you might be sharing the wrong screen.
Yeah, close out your sharing option and then reopen your sharing screen option and check the one you want.
Okay. Here. Let me go like that. So bizarre.
I gave a presentation the other day to Rotary, and it was all lined up and everything 15 minutes in advance. And I opened up my laptop and shut it again. And from that point forward, I couldn't see my notes for the entire presentation.
Oh, great.
It was fun. Fortunately, I could wing it pretty well. There we go.
Okay.
Perfect.
So here's the map. This line going north-south is the 30th Street corridor. To give you a little bit of perspective, this is the Hank Aaron State Trail right here in the red. Orange indicates that it's a planned trail. It's on someone's plan. And so this is the Oak Leaf Trail over here, the Beer Line Trail, and the 30th Street corridor running north all the way up to Haven Woods over here. This is an active rail line. And so the thought is to build a rail width trail. So a rail width trail is an active rail line with a trail next to it. And so we've been doing a lot of work, preliminary work, to determine whether or not this was feasible. And so I'm going to stop sharing this screen right now. And do you see the preliminary feasibility study now?
It's a very wavy map. It's sigmoidal.
Okay.
It looks like it's kind of frozen.
Yeah.
Okay. Hang on, I'm going to stop sharing again.
Okay.
And now I'm going to share again and see if it comes up. Yeah, here we go.
Yeah, that looks
Okay.
great.
Lovely. Okay, so this is the preliminary feasibility study that was completed in October of last year. And essentially, we worked together on this project with 11 partners. And Cheryl, who is going to speak next, oh boy. This is a picture of the 30th Street corridor looking south on North Avenue. It really gives you an idea, though, of the size of the corridor, where you could have the active rail line with the trail right here on the right-hand side. And so we went through, and here are some of the partners, or all the partners who were involved in the project, and really tried to determine whether or not it was feasible to have a trail on the side of that rail corridor. What we found was that there were several pinch points that would make it pretty difficult, but really we've done a survey nationally of all the rail width trails throughout the country, and there's over 400 of them, and they vary in size from 5 feet away to 30 feet away and more. So this definitely falls within the framework of those national rail width trails, but it's all about the relationship between Watco, or Wisconsin and Southern, who's the operator, and the governing municipality who will be doing the agreement with the railroad. So, but this is what this study was all about, was finding out whether or not this was even feasible project to do. And so we looked at different segment analysis, implementation, some cost considerations, commuter rail considerations, again, the pinch points, the ownership along the line. It was really a great exercise. I think one of the biggest takeaways from this exercise, though, for me, was the building of trust within the partners who are working on this study together, the preliminary feasibility study. And you can see we had Northwest Side CDC, Near West Side Partners, MMSD, the county, the city, Haven Woods, 30th Street Industrial Corridor Corp, and Cheryl will speak, Urban Ecology Center, WISDOT, and Villard Avenue Business Improvement District. So I can share this with you. I'm happy to share this with you. I can put it in the chat, or I can just, if Caressa, if you send me the emails, I'll just send you a link to it. But that's really the real high level cursory. And I'd like to invite Cheryl Blue to speak. And she can go over some of the work that's being done in the neighborhood right now. Cheryl's the executive director of the 30th Street Industrial Corridor Corp. And was one of the authors of the study.
Great, thanks, Willie. And Cheryl, before you jump in, I just want to remind anyone if they have any questions, we'll save that for after Cheryl's finished chatting with us.
Okay. I'm here. Should I go? Are you ready? Oh, hold
Yeah.
on. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, because I couldn't hear you. Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Thank you so much for having me. As Willie mentioned, my name is Cheryl Blue, and I'm the executive director of the 30th Street Industrial Corridor Corp. Our organization was founded 30 years ago to work to create economic development in the 30th Street Corridor. The boundaries of the 30th Street Corridor are Highland to Hampton, Highland on the south, Hampton on the north, and basically 27th to 35th Street. It is comprised of 880 acres of industrial infrastructure. This area of the city is where Harley was founded, Briggs and Stratton, Master Lock, Badger, Meter, all of these manufacturing giants once occupied this area of the city. And of course, with the loss of those companies and jobs, the area is very challenged right now. We also have the former A.O. Smith campus, which has nearly 100 contiguous acres of land to be redeveloped. So that's what we're working on overall in the city. And we've been working with Willie, Rails to Trails, and the partners on this project, which we see as a catalytic project for our area. We believe that installing this trail, sometimes we call it a linear park, will be a great amenity for people in the community. As you all know, as people who are bike enthusiasts, it's challenging to get north to south a lot of times on your bike in the city. And so this trail would be a great amenity for people who live and work here. I have to mention that a couple years ago, Willie took us to Minneapolis to see the Greenway there, their 5-mile bike trail on the rail. And it was absolutely amazing. And then this past summer, I was able to get a bike, because of the COVID and there wasn't much to do. And I was able to ride the trails throughout Milwaukee. And it was just absolutely phenomenal. So that just makes us that much more excited about this project coming to the 30th Street corridor. But what we're tasked with is the equitable development of this project. This rail will touch many neighborhoods on the north side, starting with the near west side, Washington Park, Sherman Park, Amani, Metcalf Park, Garden Home, Century City Triangle, Villard. And so our task is to engage all of the residents as well as all of the different stakeholders throughout the community that will surround this trail in the process so that that we prevent gentrification and displacement, because when the trail comes in, I'm sure property values may rise. There'll be other amenities that may be built along there. So we just want to get ahead of that process to prevent gentrification, but also to engage the community and people so that they understand the benefit of this amenity and how it is ultimately, the purpose of it is to benefit the people that live here the most. And so we're excited about the partnership. We're really excited about the potential for this project. We have a long way to go, but we're very, very excited, and we're grateful for Willie and his team and all of the partners that have been working on it thus far.
Thank you so much, Cheryl, for joining us. Thank you, Willie. I'm gonna open up the floor to any questions. We have about 8 minutes till we move on to the next topic. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to raise your hand, or James can track any questions in the comment box.
Angie's got one.
Angie, go ahead.
Okay, Cheryl, thanks for the presentation. We met a couple years ago, a long time ago. And I was wondering, I've heard a lot about the displacement happening along the High Line and the 601 in Chicago and other popular rail trails like that. What measures does a team think that they might be able to apply to ensure that gentrification doesn't displace the local residents?
Thanks for your question, and I hope you're doing well, Angela. Well, the thing is that it's very preliminary right now. You know, there's a lot of research that has to be done just in terms of who the property owners and the state of a lot of the buildings along this trail. But number one, it's about relationships and engagement, bringing all the partners to the table, transparency, and looking at other models to make sure, and learning those lessons to make sure that doesn't happen here.
Absolutely, and I think it's great to get ahead of the game because it will happen otherwise. And look out.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
No
If
problem.
I could add to that, you know, one of the things that we're looking at is, you know, all of that, the buildings along the corridor themselves. You know, for instance, in Washington, D.C., what happened with a lot of those buildings, they set up a land trust and controlled some of those buildings. So then that way, if the city, if these buildings are in a land trust, then a developer just can't come in, buy the building for cheap, and then build, you know, high-end condos there. And so those kinds of protections, you know, have to be in place. But those, you know, they take a long time, like Cheryl was saying. It's not something that can be done overnight. And I think it's really understanding, you know, the community needs that are there right now. And you know, what does the community want? Does the community even want a trail when jobs are so few? So, I mean, it's part of the puzzle. It's not the end all, you know, a trail, so.
Right. No, it's far from the end all, but it sure can get you there somehow, sometimes.
Okay, does anyone else have any other questions for Nicholas?
Hey, great presentation, and long overdue in that part of the city for sure. I've heard of rails with trail before, but I'm not familiar with are there any design challenges that are different than a trail that's replacing an existing rail bed? Are there any safety issues? Is there any separation required with fencing, or could you maybe speak to that a little bit?
I think you answered all the questions. They're all yes. There's giant challenges. There's giant safety concerns. There's liability concerns. But within the context of the study, and I just want to acknowledge also that Sarah Brigant from Northwest Side CDC is here, and she was part of the study team as well. So Sarah, if there's anything you hear that you'd like to add, please do. You know, there's lots of challenges with rail with trail, and primarily when you do not own the land and you do not have the easement, that's when, you know, there's challenges. And so then you have to address that and address the needs of the landowner.
Are there significant additional costs that are going to be incurred with that, do you think, or any greater challenges in fundraising, or?
I think that there's going to be some questions about that for sure. You know, the liability piece is a big piece. The fortunate thing about a rail with trail is that it's on a flat, you know, it's a flat, straight piece of land. So it's really, as far as the engineering goes, at least for the straightforward parts, is if you can get the permissions, it's not, you know, that giant of a deal. But about 1.5 miles of it is below grade, meaning that it's below the below the road. And so you'd have to have ramps, to address those safety concerns. And that's where a lot of the money comes in.
Okay, I think I have room for one more. Cynthia, did you take your hand down? Okay, you do have a question? Okay.
Yes, I do.
One last question, and I'm sorry, Kevin, I might have to circle back with you. Move on
Yes.
to the next subject.
Yeah, so I guess my question has to do, I think this is a great opportunity for almost, that crossover that we're always talking about, north side, south side. Has there been any conversations around how we can, I think given that the Hank-Aaron Trail is right there connected, I know that would be a great opportunity for one of the groups that we have usually in the summer to take on that route and, go north. Has there been any talks about how to best engage with, people that are either current users of the Hank-Aaron Trail and can possibly extend and support more of that route of the Badger, because I think that would be a great addition for breaking out from the Hank-Aaron Trail and, having folks explore more of, the north side and really get them up there.
I guess I'll take that again. The land in between the Hank-Aaron State Trail that ends at Seelig, so there's that little spur that goes north, that goes underneath that underground connection, the bridge by Urban Ecology Center, and then it goes north past the stadium. That land in between Seelig Drive and Blue Mound is owned by MMSD. They're a supporter of this project, and they have verbally committed to allowing a separated trail on their land from which would provide that connection from the Hank-Aaron all the way up to Blue Mound. And then we would have to, of course, get from Blue Mound past Miller and Harley, just that. And so this is a giant project. It's with a lot of challenges, but that piece in itself, just going north from the Hank, that one's actually could be an early win.
All right. Thank you very much for your questions. I will say, if Cheryl's still here, Cheryl, I'd love to get together with you at some point, because my big thing is, the questions that I have, I'll reserve for another time, but I'm wondering how, what can be done in the meantime to make an impact with our local leaders and get informal commitments to really try to dial in and focus on not or preventing any privateering that could really damage that developmental process, because land is land is land, like you start catching wind of what's going on over in that area. And like I said, I want this to be a working group, and I could say, I'll use an I statement. I would love to be your ally, but I do know some other people in this virtual room that would like to serve as an ally. The whole project is you, it's y'all, it's very much your neighborhood, but we would like to be able to.
No, it's everyone, and we're building out the process now. We're working on the process and securing the funding for creating the process, but everyone is welcome. We have sent the feasibility study to all of the elected officials, the city, the state level, and things like that. So people are aware of it, but I would welcome, people that have thoughts like you to kind of figure out what is the ask and how do we build it out. And one of the things we're big on is the process and engagement and building relationships. And so when we all pitch in and help to build it and make it happen, then we all own it. And that's the point. And so we welcome you. And if you want to meet offline, prior to then and voice some of your concerns, just send me an email. We'll get something scheduled on the calendar.
Sounds good. Thanks so much for
Thanks for having
both of you.
Okay.
It's good to see you. Say hi to your daughter.
I will.
Had so much fun riding on the trail with her.
Okay. Look forward to seeing you guys on the trail this summer.
All right. Take care.
Okay. Bye.
Okay, so we're on to the next item, which is Peer Cities Review. As I mentioned earlier, there's going to be some working activities throughout the year to try to revive and give this group some different life, perhaps different identity. I don't have a ton of time to go into the history of this particular group, but I do have a feedback form that I'm going to share with all of you, no matter if you're members or not. And it's actually got a link to a very ancient site on it that actually goes through the entire history almost of the Bike and Pedestrian Task Force. But ultimately, it really did start with it being a task-oriented group surrounding the development of a more comprehensive bike plan. And then it sort of became it's like a de facto group. So I think there's some things that we can do to give ourselves some authority, maybe drum up another work plan. But I've actually I've asked our representation from the Legislative Reference Bureau to come and join us. And Kathy, I was wondering if you could share with us a little bit about the research that you've helped put together on behalf of the LRB. I know that we shared this with at least a small group or a subcommittee a couple of years ago. And I'd like to bring that research to light and then just share the feedback form with you all so that we can learn more about how to move forward with this group.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, the Legislative Reference Bureau was asked a couple of years ago can you guys all hear me okay? I've been having trouble with my audio over the last couple of meetings. But the Legislative Reference Bureau was asked to do some research on peer cities. And kind of what I found as part of the research is there is a very broad spectrum. There's really no one size fits all. A memo was put together about 2 years ago with about 8 or 9 cities. A lot of them were in Texas and in California. The cities were Austin, Baltimore, Houston, Madison, Minneapolis, Portland, San Francisco, and Seattle. So those, the research was actually done by another member of the Legislative Reference Bureau, and those were the cities that she established as peers for Milwaukee. And what I thought was interesting in going back and looking at some of those things, just the range of issues that they cover and how they're put together. There were some commonalities in the way that groups were put together. A lot of them, actually, surprisingly, were the members of the committee were actually tied to the aldermanic districts or the wards or whatever the appropriate designation is for the cities that they're in. And the groups tended to be rather large. I mean, when I looked at them, I would think that a 29-member committee is probably a little bit unwieldy, but I was surprised at how many of them had 15 and 20 members. I don't know if that's something that this committee would want to consider, but when you bring in that many people, it actually does kind of expand your reach into the community and provides a lot more diverse viewpoints. It does become kind of a challenge to manage it, though. One of the other commonalities I noticed with all of the peer cities is the vast majority of them meet on a monthly basis. I know the Milwaukee Task Force has always, or typically had met every other month, but there was a lot of, they met monthly, there was a lot of community engagement, and the vast majority of them had very well documented things online. Our peer cities, they kind of ran the gamut for when their committees, when they began. Some are relatively recent, having, like Baltimore, they just started theirs in 2015. Prior to that, it had been an informal group, but they just formalized it. Minneapolis is probably about the oldest one. Theirs was started in 1990. And out of all of the groups, what I found with them is they had a lot of very formal resolutions that were directed to the council. You know, they were formal communications where they expressed opinions on all kinds of things, with projects and policies and at the federal level, at the state level. And so that's something that our Bike Ped Task Force really hasn't gotten into super much. And I'm just kind of rambling here. So if anybody has any questions and specifically, feel free to jump in. But I'm just trying to say kind of compare what we do with what some of the other cities do. The one thing I thought was interesting, San Francisco, they actually, in order to get community engagement and membership or attendance, they use like Eventbrite to schedule their meetings. And I'm not quite sure exactly how that, I'm not real familiar with it, but they had a lot of community engagement. But they also hadn't had a lot of recent activity, so perhaps that's not. I was surprised how many of the groups remained active all through 2020. I kind of expected that maybe with the pandemic that there would be kind of a lessening, but actually most of them were pretty active. Let me see, Portland I thought had an interesting setup. What they do is every month they have a presentation, kind of like we just had on the 30th Street corridor, and then the committee actually submits formal suggestions and recommendations. So the outcome of what this meeting would be a report that would be sent back to the presenters. And I think that's probably the most common thing I saw in all of these, that there was a lot of actual recommendations and opinions that were formally put out. Some of them were direct memos to the councils or their respective government. Some were just kind of self-contained, like within the minutes. They were worded like resolutions, you know, whereas this, whereas that kind of thing, but it was all very internal. You could find it online, but it wasn't actually directed to anyone. So there's really, I don't know if any of that information is helpful, but this committee really could kind of do whatever it kind of sets its mind to do. The issues that committees have put forth recommendations runs the gamut from legislation and funding, grant opportunities to, roadway design. So really none of the groups though did everything. It seemed like each kind of group sort of specialized in one specific thing or a couple of things. So I think we would probably want to narrow our focus just a little bit, at least at the beginning, to keep it sort of manageable. And most of them were formed for like a particular purpose. They decided what they wanted to do, and then the group was formed around that. In some of our conversations, we kind of looked at, who do we think would be good on the committee, and then what would they do? But most of the groups that seem to have some longevity and some success seem to have formed the other way, which was originally how ours was formed back in. Originally, it was to do the 2010 bike plan, or whatever the first year was. I don't remember the whole history. But so, does anybody have any questions that I could answer, or I'm just going to stop rambling here? Okay.
No, that was really great, because essentially the last time we had our small committee, that was essentially what you shared with us. So I really appreciate you kind of kicking up that dirt again and letting us know. In a good way, kicking up dirt in a good way. I know I see Kevin's hand is raised, but before I go into that, or before I call on Kevin, I would like you to, if you can, share what would be necessary, or what would the steps be in order for this body to have, for example, enabling legislation, or what are some of like the processes that must occur in order to evolve into something else than what we are now?
Well, essentially, all that has to happen is a resolution has to be introduced at the Common Council, and then it will go to the appropriate committee, probably Public Health and Safety. I talked to Jim, the city clerk, about appointments to the committee, and they will definitely go to Public Health and Safety. So I would assume that the enabling legislation for the committee itself would also go to that committee. But basically, we need an aldermanic sponsor who would introduce it, and then the committee would discuss whether or not it supports what that vision is, and then it would go to the council for approval. The enabling legislation is actually fairly straightforward. It would basically set out the membership, how many members, where they would be pulled from, if they're appointed by the alders or by the mayor, or how you apply, kind of thing. It would have a general purpose. and it would lay out any specifically legislated reports that would need to be done. You know, like an annual would report annually or quarterly, or if they are charged with updating the bike plan every 5 years, kind of thing. Those sorts of things would be in the enabling legislation, but it's pretty bare bones what the actual enabling legislation says. The actual running of the committee, how you elect officers, all of that is typically done in bylaws that are adopted by the group itself after the enabling legislation is put into place.
Thank you.
It might be worth just mentioning really quickly that, you know, I think that's the point where this conversation started probably, what, 2.5 years ago already at this point, is the task force was looking at sort of the purpose of the group and like what you have purview over, and wanted to change that. And I think we were finding that to expand some of those areas of influence, that would take changing the enabling legislation. And I think that was where a lot of the conversations started, like, well, what kind of group does the task force want to be? So anyway.
Thank you for that. Kevin, question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for that presentation. Now, this question is kind of similar to what Caressa was talking about, but I was really interested in knowing a little bit more about the Minneapolis committee. You mentioned that they had, they would actually draw up legislation of sorts, and I'm wondering what sort of mechanism did they use for that? Did they find an ally in their aldermanic districts or whatever, and then send them the legislation that they were typing up, or was it another way, like kind of like the way the departments at the city do it? I'm interested in understanding how they did that.
It was really more along the lines of like departmental communications to our council. I don't know if you're familiar with that process. There's, departments when they're asked to provide information, sometimes it's forwarded to the city clerk and then it just becomes part of the file. These tended to be, or they seem to be sort of that nature. They were sort of like memos that were addressed to the council that were just sort of forward to them, that then became part of the public record, where they would say, we recommend, this project, or we support the Department of Public Works applying for that grant. It was just providing formal public support or dissent against various things, but they were sent directly to the council. They don't become part of, they don't appear as though they become part of like their ordinances or anything like that. It's more like informational reports that would get submitted to their council.
Oh, okay. So they weren't like doing like ordinance changes or anything like that. They were just being like, okay, so for example, like if we wanted to support the letter that Alderwoman Coggs, I believe, said about like snow removal, it would be something like that.
Right.
Okay.
Yes. But but they did them on a very regular basis. They weighed in quite often. I want to say for almost every meeting, there were like 3 or 4 things that came out. And sometimes it was just recognition of people who were working on projects or, various things. But it was specifically addressed to the council. So it was a public communication that ended up and honestly, I apologize, I'm not super familiar with their whole council structure exactly.
Sure, no, and I don't expect you to be.
Yeah, but I just want to contrast that to some of the things that were listed that looked like ordinances for other groups that were just part of the minutes. So they were still, you could find them, but they weren't quite as public, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. Thank you.
And
Jane,
they actually,
sorry, go
I was
ahead.
going to say Minneapolis also had one of the larger groups. They have 13 wards, so there's a representative from each ward, and then there's 3 community members, and then there, if I can do my math, maybe 15 other department heads or departmental people that were involved. So it sounds like a nightmare group to me personally, being on the organizational side, but it appears to work for them. I mean, in that they put out they've got a lot of product out there. So Okay. Yes, who's next?
Let's see.
I just wanted to
Go
call
ahead,
attention to Angie had some questions in the chat
Yes,
there.
go ahead.
Oh, yes. In fact, there was enabling legislation for the Bike Ped Task Force, but it doesn't, a task force has a different structure than like a regular committee would have. I think because you won't find it's a resolution that just kind of is made its way through the council files. When you look at some of the other committees, the official committees, they actually appear in the code of ordinances and their duties are laid out so that they're much more publicly accessible. And it's much easier to keep people on track in terms of what groups are supposed to be doing what. There's really only maybe a dozen committees that would fall under the kind of thing that this group would be looking at. And would the council make recommendations about priorities? I'm not sure I understand the question, Angie, about would the council make recommendations?
Okay, would the advisory body or whatever you're calling it make recommendations on yearly about their own priorities that the council or the body might have as recommendations for implementation in an existing plan, like a bicycle plan or a pedestrian plan or a complete streets plan? Do they go that far?
The enabling legislation could call that out, say that, by February 1st or whatever, the committee shall put forth the work plan for the year. And it could be required that it would go to a committee. It wouldn't necessarily have to, though. For example, the Capital Improvements Committee, they make their enabling legislation requires them to make recommendations to the mayor, but it doesn't say anything at all about how often they have to meet. They don't have to get approval from any standing committee to do whatever it is they want to do. They can put together a work plan for the year or not. They have a lot of latitude.
So my follow-up question for that would be, was there an indication that these letters of support or resolutions made any difference?
To be honest, I didn't have a chance to really follow up on that. I was just kind of looking to see I was looking more for process.
Sure. Yeah, I think that they couldn't ignore the fact that there was an advisory
Right.
memo or something like that. Okay.
And if nothing else, it raises awareness.
Yeah.
If not even among the council, but because all of those are very publicly accessible, anybody who's interested can look at them and then can bring that up with, individual council members with their representatives. So yeah, I really can't speak to how effective any of them individually were, but it certainly can't hurt to have that out there.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Well, that's a really great question, Angie, and I think that it's worth possibly discussing some opportunities to do some informational interviews with other members of those bodies. If it sounds of interest to you, I'd definitely be interested myself. I put together a feedback form. I think I mentioned this before, for everyone in this virtual room, no matter if you're a member of the public participating, just joining us to learn about what's going on, and also future members of this group and existing members of this group. So I'm going to post it in the chat, but I'm also going to ask James to send it out to our network. And it's a handful of questions about what do you think you know about this group, and also what do you think it should be. And it actually also asks whether a group like this should evolve and who they should report to potentially or make recommendations to, which was just one of the questions that we were discussing. So I don't know if anyone has any questions about the feedback form. That's sort of like my activity for this agenda item. I just gravitated towards the feedback opportunity because I know Kevin's got something in store for us. So does anyone have any additional questions about peer cities reviews? I think that we can send out some of this other information that Kathy shared with us in small committee before for anybody to look at to help inform their feedback too, if they'd like.
I think one important point to make, though, about the peer cities is to not get too hung up on what other cities are doing. We really need to look at what's going to work here, because just because things worked in other places doesn't necessarily mean it would work here. So I would caution against just looking at another city and just trying to duplicate that. So
Exactly. It's always the name of the game. You know, the goalposts are always moving. So, Becky, you had have a question?
Yeah, I'm sorry about this, Kathy, but I think you mentioned it, but I don't remember. I apologize. But I believe you mentioned as far as organizational time period for them to set up the committees and from initiation to establishment of maybe even subcommittees within that committee and development of bylaws and as well as mission statement and vision. And maybe I'm getting too far into this, so I apologize.
The timeline is really kind of tricky to, it's tricky to even estimate. Assuming, for the sake of argument, if, let's say, this group knew exactly what it wanted to be, okay, typing out, doing the legislation and getting it through council could be a relatively simple thing. It needs to be introduced at a council meeting, it needs to go to a standing committee, and then it needs to be approved by the full council. Theoretically, that's a 3-week cycle. If you had something finished that there was no discussion about at the committee or the council level, I mean, establishing the committee could be quite that quick. But the tricky part is whether or not you have buy-in from all of the council members. There might be some concerns that council members may have, so there might be some tweaking of the legislation. And once the committee is formed, getting it filled is a whole other thing, depending on if people are appointed or if people need to apply. I mean, I can't even begin to guess how long. I mean, maybe as an analogy, like the Capital Improvements Committee, which was created about 10 years ago, it was created in fall of 2009, and the membership was very set. It was like the chair of finance, the chair of public works. It was, everybody knew who was on it. There were only 2 appointments that needed to be made, but they didn't hold their first real meetings for 6 months. It took a while to get up and running and just to get everybody on board. And they didn't have to create bylaws or a vision. All of that was handled beforehand, as part of before the legislation actually was approved. So I know that's not a helpful answer and probably not at all encouraging, but I'm not going to kid anybody. It could be a while before this is really a done thing.
Well, and I guess the reason why I asked this is I'm staff to a commission, and there's committees within that commission and even subcommittees of particular committees, subcommittees. And, you had mentioned the amount of people, and for us, we're finding we don't have enough people. And so the duration to get things done takes longer. And that's where I was going with that thought process.
Well, I as we move out of this item, I hope to offer a little bit of comfort, some additional knowledge to share with you. Right now, in the grant that I serve on through Wisconsin Bike Fed in Milwaukee and Safety Healthy Streets, we have an opportunity to get some technical assistance from the grant on anything we want. But we particularly, when I say we, that's myself, Professor Bob Schneider, who's on the call, the AHW Medical College Wisconsin, which is a part of our grant team, and the DPW multimodal unit, all been working together to look at the various systems within the city of Milwaukee that can improve, and from engagement to project prioritization, all that stuff. And one of the items is this particular body. So we've been searching high and low for someone to come and work with us a little bit. I call them sort of like the expert from 200 miles away that can kind of look at all of the groups that are at play, from the advocacy groups like Milwaukee Safe and Healthy Streets, formerly Path to Platinum, this particular group, and now the Complete Streets Committee, and how they all relate to one another. What is their agency? And maybe just spur some realizations so that we can get this moving. It's not a deep dive strategic planning session. I think it's probably going to be a maximum a breakup of maybe 3.5 hours in a couple of sessions. But I mean, just a little extra assistance in moving us along. And I hope it's going to be expeditious. You're all welcome to ask me more questions about that. But we have connected with a woman who is a group facilitator who used to be in MPS, and now she's just like a private facilitator, contract person that focuses on working with groups like this and working through issues. It's like with technical assistance. We're still courting her though, so I'm not going to say who she is because I want her to be fully on board. But it's going to be someone, and we wanted it to be someone who has lived in this community, so she has formally worked in MPS. So that's the news.
The other good news is I was chatting with one of the alders today, and they did express some support for being a sponsor. So if we do kind of come up with something, we at least have, a tentative, someone that we can at least reach out to, who seemed amenable to that sort of thing. So for whatever, that's a little bit of news.
Thank you so much, Kathy, for sharing that information with us and answering our questions. And I hope to hear back from all of you in this feedback form. I'm really excited. So what do we got next on the list here? Let's see.
Well, this was where either moving into the exercise for the mission vision, or if you wanted to bump up the community dialogue, depending on what direction you wanted to go with guest speakers.
Sorry, 1 second. Oh, you know what? Well, it's up to Kevin. Kevin, what do you want to do?
Oh boy. So I do want to be mindful of our guest speakers, but also because we've just been thinking about this and we've been, we're kind of like thinking about where this bike ped task force will be going. I think it might be beneficial to do the exercise real quick. So it would essentially be a half-hour exercise, which isn't enough time, but it'll help us get started with thinking about how to do a mission statement and a vision. And a lot of the work is probably going to end up on my lap as I'm sorting through the comments. But is it cool if we continue with the exercise and then have the guest speakers finalize everything?
I think so. I mean, I think we're making good time. So you just want to jump into it. Take it away.
Okay, so basically what we're going to be doing to create this mission and the vision is to do storytelling. So I've asked James to help break us up into little groups. I have a Jamboard that I set up. It's a very basic one, but I just put it in the chat so you can all go in there. So the idea here is we will answer this question. So first we'll do some brainstorming with undo that. We'll do some brainstorming first where we talk about what the purpose of the Bike Ped Task Force is. And then eventually we'll spend 5 minutes doing that. Then 5 minutes we'll use, based on the input that we've created, we'll create a story of what the Bike Ped Task Force, what the purpose of the Bike Ped Task Force is. Now, there should be enough people here for 8 groups of either 3 or 4 people. So once you break up into a group, It's going to be a bit of a free-for-all where you go to the group members part and you start writing your name and mark your territory. So that part should be a little fun as we stake out our claims, but this is intended for everyone who is here at the meeting. Like people who aren't part of this board, that's totally fine. I want to know what people who regularly attend and who are a part of this team also, I want to know what they think the bike ped task force should be, and we can go from there. So does anybody have any questions on this? I know I was kind of brief and I ran through it really quick and everything, but
should we just designate one person to put up that information, or do you just want everybody to start
so
with
for
their
the
brainstorm?
brainstorming part, I want everybody to type down something. Now there's a sticky note feature on the left-hand side of the board. You can use the sticky note feature to just start typing down stuff in the first upper square box, and then you use the text box feature. Somebody should be designated to write the story then, but everybody should be able to do the sticky note feature and start just like throwing ideas of what they want. So it'll be 5 minutes to throw ideas out, 5 minutes to create those ideas into a story, and then we'll come back after 10 minutes, we'll come back and present to the bigger group. Meanwhile, I'll have this stuff and I'll do the rest of the exercise to create the mission, and we'll talk about it at a next meeting. Does that work for folks? Yes. Becky, please.
I just want to mention Brian Peters just emailed me that he is unable to pull up captioning. The notice as far as the meeting being switched to today, I think that went out, was it yesterday, James?
Yeah, I don't know when you received that email, but captioning's been on since about 5 minutes in.
Okay. All right. Maybe he was working with his IT to see if they can get it.
I think,
unfortunately, I couldn't get a interpreter, and so let him know that I was able to get an interpreter. So hopefully he'll be able to come back on board.
Okay. I think captioning happens individually in Microsoft Teams. If he goes up to the triple dots next to the signal thing and goes to the captioning, he may be able to turn on captioning that way.
Yeah, I think it's on his end. I mean, I'm agreeing with that.
Okay.
So I'm hoping that he gets it worked out.
Right. And I mean,
I've been having problems with this with other meetings also.
You have?
This is Brian, through the interpreter speaking.
Okay. Yeah, we'll have to figure out something better. I always do appreciate Brian's point of view on these in these meetings as well, and I really want his input on how the bike ped task force could be better in the future, right? Does anybody have any other questions? Okay. Yeah.
Sorry, that was a mistake.
Okay. Well, if nobody has any other questions, then James,
I already typed it in.
I'm sorry?
Yes, I'm sorry, this is Brian. I already typed it in.
Okay. So if we don't have any other questions, James, would you mind breaking us off into groups of either 3 or 4? Ideally 3.
Yep, I've got 6 groups already lined up, so I'll start them now if you're ready.
Yeah, I'm ready. All right, we're gonna stake our claims.
All right. How long? When did you want to come back?
Let's come back in, let's say, 15 minutes, just so that we can create some actually decent stories.
All right, got it. See y'all soon. All right, Claude, I'm in the process of moving you to group 6. Let me see if there's. Are you getting any notice on your end?
What's this?
Really big
Meetings.
letters.
Oh, and
Okay. Oh, I'm so sorry for the person who wrote in this
Oh.
help.
They're pulling us back so quickly.
yeah, we're in the middle of it.
It's like we just shifted dimensions.
Yeah.
Jamboard is pretty fun.
All right.
But I,
think
but I may have
everyone's
been the only
up.
one in the twilight zone.
Claude,
But
you
it-
didn't have anybody?
I was all by myself.
Oh my
No,
gosh.
should
Did
have
you
just
come up with a good story?
Come in.
Should have hijacked a page.
I
We
tried,
took
and the
them in
chat
at the last
box didn't
minute.
work. So I emailed James, and he finally got a hold of me, and I got 30 seconds with Angie and
Sarah.
someone else. Who was that?
Sarah.
Sarah.
Well, Claude, you should definitely share
That's
how you
right.
feel with us.
Yeah, so actually at this point I did want to ask people if they'd like to share, if there's anybody from a specific group that thought that they had done like that, I mean, I'm positive everyone did a really good job, but I'm interested in seeing if anybody had something they would like to share. If not, then I'll describe what's going to happen next. So if nobody wants to share.
Go ahead, Sarah, we're so jived,
Oh boy, are we sharing?
Yeah, why
Please
not?
do.
I shared my entire input already, so.
Yeah, we came up with, I mean, I would say read our Post-it notes. We were very interested in advocating for safer streets, more convenient and comfortable, safe for walking and biking, ways that can improve quality of life. And then definitely thinking about representing different interests, different communities, We want people to pay attention to us. We want to have some legitimacy, maybe advocating for different types of action items where we are supporting policy recommendations or enforcement ideas that address reckless driving, things of that nature.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Now, when we were coming back, it sounded like people were in the middle of discussion. Nicholas, would you like to share something? I feel like we interrupted you.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Bob and I were alone. We were kind of just the two of us. We had somebody else that left. So we were kind of talking, and I was in the middle of just saying that, thinking back a couple of years ago when we first started having these conversations about the purpose of the task force and where we'd like to see the group go and what its mission should be. And, my opinion then, and I think it still is, that, that the multimodal group does a great job, and we don't want to have, I don't believe that we want to have a redundancy in this group reviewing every project and providing, added bureaucracy to a system that works well, but providing support with that group in terms of communicating with the lawmakers and the council and the mayor, and having maybe more teeth to the policies and actions that the multimodal group wants to take. And at times, I've been under the impression that maybe those that are working with the city, James and Mike and others in the group, have felt maybe limited by what sort of freedoms they have to express themselves about the policies that the city should be taking. And this group, I believe, could provide a better impetus to the lawmakers themselves, the council members, to actually take those actions without there any sort of fear of repercussions within the city, being that it's an independent civilian led organization or group. So that's what I was in the middle of talking about with Bob, and we had a couple other points we were talking about inclusion, with the group in terms of having representation throughout the city of all economic and demographic backgrounds in the city, geographic backgrounds in the city, and that should be one of the goals of this group as well, to have representative inclusion in this group as well. But yeah, so that was kind of what we were in the middle of talking about before we got pulled over here. So
no, that's exciting stuff, and that's exactly what Caressa and I are looking for when we're thinking about these things. We're thinking about, well, as Kathy illustrated, like, the sky's kind of the limit with us here, and so seeing the different points of view for what this group can be in the future is definitely incredibly important for us moving forward. And I definitely agree with what you were saying, Nicholas. So thank you for sharing. So what I'm going to be doing next is looking through those mission statements or the little stories that we've created and seeing any similarities, seeing, like, identify, like, places, and seeing people and places, and, like, finding causes in the statements that we've created, finding actions in those statements, and then finding how we make an impact. And that's going to really help me define what the mission statement is going to be moving forward. But we won't be doing anything without consulting you folks and getting the approval necessary for that, and then moving forward with the vision after that. So that's the plan for this right now. So I'll be working on that, and then by our next bike bed task force meeting, we'll have something written out for us to look at and discuss. So so that pretty much concludes that activity. Thank you all for participating in it, and I think if there's no more questions, I think we can move on to another item, Carissa.
Yes, and sorry we didn't get through all of the jam boards, but I'm gonna post our survey again right here in the chat. Again, anyone can fill this out because this is also information that will be crammed together with that activity, so we can come up with something that looks like a pretty package the next time we see you all. Yeah, so I have a couple of other items on the list that I know have been rising to the top in the community, and I'm actually gonna give the mic to Professor Bob Schneider, and the reason why I'm going to do that is we're going to talk about the I-94 East-West project. I know on Facebook somebody asked, "Hey, how do highways relate to bicycle and pedestrian related issues?" And I think Bob can answer that the best. But the answer is they do. But what's cool about what Bob's going to share with us is I'd really like to get some more information from all of you and a consensus about backing this opinion article that he's written, and I've tried to share with on a broader level, statewide and nationally. So, Bob, take it away before I, just end up taking up all your time. Okay.
Well, hey, thanks, Carissa, for the invite to the meeting and to speak on the I-94 project. Like you said, it's important for pedestrian and bicycle transportation. It's important for all of us as we think about the transportation system that we're developing across our entire region for all modes, walking, biking, transit, and driving, but to create a better system. The proposal that we're talking about is the I-94 corridor between 70th Street and 16th Street, 3 miles of I-94. That's my son, Jake, joining the meeting. And the proposal this past summer was to, by the governor and secretary of transportation, was to expand the freeway from 6 to 8 lanes. There's some really important considerations with that, and I can get into those, but what I have done initially with the help of Montavious Jones, who's on the call, and a number of other people who I've consulted with across the community, is written a letter that we're hoping to publish potentially for a national audience and potentially also for local audiences, to say that we oppose the expansion from 6 to 8 lanes. The letter makes 5 main points, but the first one isn't even a point, but it is to say that this is not inevitable. There's going to be a public process, and even if you may have heard that there's been business support for this idea of expansion, and there's been some labor union support for this expansion, I don't think that everybody's had a full understanding of the implications of the project and some of the assumptions that are questionable behind it. So it's not inevitable. There will be a public process coming up that could ask the state DOT and the Federal Highway Administration to revisit this idea. And that would add a little bit more time to the project, but it would ultimately allow the project to become something better than currently proposed. So in terms of giving people some arguments to make in support of 6 lanes and redoing the highway at its current number of lanes rather than expanding, these are the 5 points that the letter makes. So I-94 should be reconstructed, but the benefits of the project can be realized within the existing number of lanes. That includes creating more jobs, creating better connections to the Menominee Valley, and supporting economic development. That can happen within 6 lanes. Second point, The expansion contradicts the governor's own task force on climate change report. And that climate change report covers, of course, issues related to emissions and carbon, but it also talks very much about social justice and racial equity in how we develop our transportation systems, and that urban freeway expansions have come disproportionately at the disadvantage of Black and Brown communities. So it's conflicting against that task force's report. A third point, additional lanes are unnecessary. There's actually, if you look closely at the traffic count data, there has not been a big change from 20 years ago. In fact, it's relatively similar in terms of traffic volumes. So it's not like we're seeing a big surge of traffic that all of a sudden there's lots more traffic congestion. Plus, there's ways to mitigate traffic congestion through demand management and better land use planning, investments in pedestrian and bicycle transportation and transit that could allow people to use other types of transportation on this corridor. Also importantly, the transportation field and how people get around is likely to change into the future. Rather than assuming we're just going to continue to grow traffic, there's likely to be a lot more working from home after the pandemic. And so automation that reduces distances between vehicles increases the capacity of highways ultimately too. So these are considerations that are not in the current models of the state DOT. Two other points. Expansion would exacerbate the social injustices. I referred to this a little bit before related to the governor's task force report, but there is the history of freeway development and expansion in our region that has disproportionately affected our communities of color. It was I-94, I-43, Wisconsin Highway 75 that divides the Washington Park and Washington Heights neighborhoods. These have all, and then the clearing of clearing of blocks of houses for the Northwest Freeway, which was never built. All these things had big impacts on the local communities. And then finally, we just need to diversify our transportation options rather than expand highways. This is something that other regions across the country are doing. And when we talked a little bit about it yesterday during another meeting, we were saying, who does this? What other regions are doing it? And our competitors across the country are really trying to invest in transit and make walking and biking better rather than expand their freeways. So the letter suggests some other options for how we should think about spending our money. Now, technically, there may not be a way to transfer the extra $150 million that would be spent to make this project 8 lanes rather than 6. That $150 million, though, is an interesting benchmark because if you think about that amount of money, we could easily build 3 bus rapid transit lines, but one that's mentioned in the letter is the 27th Street BRT and Layton Boulevard corridor, north-south. We could invest in that. We could redesign commercial corridors throughout the city and in suburban areas that would really refocus what we need in terms of local economic development and more walk and bike friendly streets at the core of communities. Rather than having these thoroughfares that cut through them, we should reunite them, and that includes state highways that cut through communities. Talks about we could potentially spend money on the 30th Street corridor trail that Willie and Cheryl presented at the beginning, and then other possibilities that really make the transportation system have more choices for people who have cars, who don't, but just makes our transportation system better. So this would ultimately lead to a more sustainable, more equitable system. And so what we're looking for here is ultimately people to sign on to this, but also I'm looking for strategic ideas about potentially how to share this most effectively. Certainly, we think that there's opportunity at the national level to get the Federal Highway Administration's attention, especially with the Biden administration today. But there's also a lot of local audiences that maybe can connect with the governor and the administration. Another piece is to connect with the state legislature. And, this could be challenging in some ways, but there may be people who are interested in a more diverse transportation system, or at least not spending an extra $150 million for extra freeway lanes that there really isn't a need for. So that's the background. I certainly welcome questions. Caressa, are there other things that we should touch on?
Well, thank you, Bob, for explaining that. And I also value your time, and I know you're at home with your family, so I won't take up too much of your time. But I wanted to put this in front of the task force with the opportunity to endorse this opinion piece and have it be moved around in the respected areas, whether that's at local level, statewide, or even on a national level. It's a long letter that's been revised many times, but it has a lot of very important information on it. So I'm reluctant to say that in general, I personally, oppose this expansion, but I'm wondering how anyone else feels about maybe giving yourselves a little bit of time to look over the letter, if you have any questions about it or suggestions. Before this group would essentially endorse this piece.
Yeah, this is Claude. I do think we should take some time to look at it, and concepts are one thing. The letter is another. So I don't think none of us, and most of us haven't seen it yet. So before we would agree to give a stamp of approval, I'd like to review it, and perhaps
Absolutely.
we could just have an email exchange on it with the task force members.
I think
Sure.
that might be good. Bob, when are you thinking of trying to get this published?
Probably in the next couple of weeks, but it's, we want to think strategically about when the best time for that is to, if, for example, the Biden administration and Secretary Buttigieg might come out with some sort of policy statements about what they envision for, urban transportation. If something like that comes out and is very positive towards, mitigating climate change and more transportation options and social justice, all these things, then that can be really used as a piece of leverage to bring up. But currently, they've already said a lot in public. They just haven't created any policy documents yet. So that's one thing I was looking for. The other is understanding when WISDOT is going to be starting to have its official public meetings. They've had quite a few meetings with local organizations already. Some of you may have already been in some of these. And so they certainly are reaching out to local community, but it hasn't been in the full open to the broader public yet. And so when that happens, it'd be good to be ahead of those so that people would have information.
Yeah. James, is it possible for us to endorse this via email after like a week or something, or not? Because I don't want to miss the opportunity of endorsing it. I did read it and I support everything that Bob has written there. But I do think that the Bike Ped Task Force should have the chance to look at it. But considering that we're not going to meet until next month, is it possible to vote on this via email after having read it?
Yeah, absolutely. The one thing you just, technically want to be mindful of is rolling quorum. So however, but, then again, yeah, let's talk offline on how to kind of manage that, because there's probably a way that could be collaborated without it being considered like a meeting. But you can also call a special like meeting or session or something, even if it's just like half an hour to talk through things, depending on availability or whatnot. Okay. Yeah, I think so. And just so you know, like the, writing and drafting letters, is really up to the preference of the chair. So it's not something that's really coming from like me as a staffer. I'm not really probably supposed to be like helping with drafting that. I mean, unless you're specifically asking for, resources or something, but it's, it's your letterhead, it's coming from the body. So,
but in this case, we wouldn't be drafting a letter though, right?
Sure.
We would just be signing off our support for Bob's letter. Is that correct?
Sounds like, yes.
Okay.
I mean, do we need a week? I don't think a week is needed. We could do this tonight. I think we should really act on it. I've read it, and I think Bob did a great job of articulating it in here. I'm ready to endorse it and move to endorse it now if you want to vote on it. But
I mean, I agree with you, Nicholas, but I do want to be mindful for Claude and any other member on the board, if they haven't had the chance to read it and they would like some time to digest it. I'm not saying maybe we decide like Friday, right, or something else. I personally would love to endorse this right now, like from my own personal feelings on this, because I agree with what Bob said, and there really should be no need to expand. Just on principle, I don't believe that we need to be expanding any of our freeways. But that's my personal opinion. I don't know, like Claude and Angie, you seem to agree with this. How long would you want to take for reading this? I want to be mindful of you folks and make sure, and I'm pretty sure Caressa would too. How long would you need to read it and make a decision?
If we need to have it done by a work day, I could try to have it done by Friday. Monday I could read it over the weekend, but I could have it done by Friday.
That's fine with me too. I just, I'm not disagreeing with anything at this point in time. I don't necessarily want to put our name on something that I personally haven't read. I
totally agree with you in that caution. I would do the same thing if I were in your position, Claude. So I didn't expect, an initial say, oh, everybody just let's sign on it right now or put our names.
It would be sketchy if we did do that.
Yeah. So I've been trying to raise my hand digitally. I don't know if anybody's seen it. It doesn't seem to be working. Oh, really? Okay. It's not sticking up there, so I can't tell. If I could just ask Bob, I remember this whole discussion years ago, and I thought it was kind of put down, and it's been quite quiescent now, and now it's raised up again. Can you tell us who's pushing it? And you said you were looking for a plan to get this out, and I'm sure you've contacted 1,000 Friends of Wisconsin and other national groups as well. But,
really good question. Just quickly on the 1,000 Friends of Wisconsin and the Sierra Club and a number of others have actually already written op-eds on it, and so they've put word out. Quite a few of the op-eds have come from Madison, and so that's good from that side, but it's good to have some local people here saying what we think about it too. James Davies from Bubbler wrote a good piece back in the summer when it first was proposed. But just very quickly for background, the initial project was in the early 2010s under the Walker administration. That was where it was proposed, and they went through the environmental impact statement process and did all that sort of environmental review. Went through public process there. Eventually got to a record of decision, which is key to this aspect. And they said that the record was to move forward with an 8-lane freeway. That was at the end of 2016, I think, or early 2017. At that point, Governor Walker, though, took it back and said, we're not going to actually fund this because there was debate about whether there was enough funding for highways. And so that was a political move that way. But with Governor Evers coming in, he advanced it with Secretary Thompson because it was already a record that was on the decision and said, okay, here's a project that we can move forward. So the easy way for them to do that is just to take what was already decided back at the end of 2016 and move that forward, fund it, and get it done. But it can go back to the drawing board a little bit and go through more of a revised environmental impact statement process. And that can certainly be done. It just would probably add 12 to 18 months to the process before a project would then get constructed. So one of the things that the labor unions are interested in is, of course, the construction jobs out of this. And so they really want to push it sooner. But 12 to 18 months delay, I think, is very well worth getting the right kind of project to be done. I can't imagine that too many extra jobs are going to be added with an additional lane. The project will still be done reconstructing a 6-lane freeway.
Right. So yeah, thanks.
Actually, I do have to stop you. I wish I could let you go on, but we do have one more item and we're running out of time. And maybe we could, if you have any more questions, we can get them answered offline. That's okay.
Absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that, folks. All right, have a good night, Bob. Kate also has some information quickly to share about the scooter pilot, and this is also something that the Bike and Pedestrian Task Force can provide a letter of support or endorse some language that Kate put together, but I'm sure it would be nice if it came from us. So Kate, take it away. Yeah.
Thanks, Saul. Thanks, and I'll be quick here. Kate Reardon, transportation planner, also in the multimodal unit, not just James and Mike. So in 2019, we had a dockless scooter pilot study. This was pretty short-lived. Scooters became legal per state statute in July. So we had a pilot study that lasted from late July to late November. We had 3 companies come in. Overall, we had really high ridership. We did have some concerns with sidewalk riding, especially early on in the pilot study, but we saw that as people got used to riding scooters, they tended to ride in the street more. And we saw, like I said, much higher ridership than what we were expecting. So we had recommended to do a second pilot study to gather more information, have it run through the course of a year, but of course we know it happened in early 2020, so that didn't happen last year. So we are recommending to do a second pilot study that will start mid-May this year. We've made a couple of changes to our regulations, including reconfiguring our zones. We previously, in the first pilot study, had very large zones, so now we've made them smaller to encourage more distribution and ridership of scooters throughout the city, not just in the downtown and east side. We will have a maximum of 3 operators. This is how many we had in 2019, but there could be some others that apply. We're restructuring our fees so that we can better tie revenue to ridership and invest in infrastructure with those fees and that revenue. We're going to require safety events. And then we are also going to require operators to provide a fleet of scooters for people of varying abilities. We're not saying adaptive because they're not going to be truly adaptive, but scooters with seats, wider baseboards, wider wheels, just to make sure that people of a variety of abilities are able to use scooters. So we have put in a resolution to Common Council to authorize this pilot study. It will be going before Public Works Committee next week on Wednesday. So I know in the past there was some conversations about perhaps doing a letter of support from the Bike Ped Task Force in 2019. That never happened. So if you all are willing to sign on to a letter of support, we would gladly take that.
Thanks, Kate. I know that Kate has inquired with the Wisconsin Bike Federation about this matter as well. I know that having scooters on the docket maybe seem a little strange because it's not necessarily a bicycle or it's not necessarily ped related, but if you look into it deeper, those micro-mobility micromobility pieces are supposed to be riding in bike lanes, so they interact with people, and they're also interacting with people on the sidewalk, whether we like it or not. So I think that sounds like there's some interesting and important changes to this new pilot that will hopefully address some of those issues and interactions with all these different mode shares in the public right of way. I see Rebecca has a question. Perhaps we could make it speedy. Rebecca, what do you have on your mind?
Just seeing, the scooters come up. I want to point out that the Equal Rights Commission will most likely be requesting folks from the multimodal section to come to their March meeting and probably requesting a report on adaptive bikes.
Okay, so and that what you're talking about is the program that, or I should say project that was launched a little bit ago on adaptive bikes, that was also integrated in with the bubbler system. Is that what you're referring to? Following up with them on that?
Yes.
Okay. That's good, I think. Very good. My suggestion really quickly is with Bob's letter and the opportunity to, I think we should probably maybe craft our own letter, perhaps on the matter of scooters. Kate, is there anything that you can share with our body that that we can like disperse and try to like make these two decisions on how to move forward with, so that everybody is informed and they feel confident on approving or supporting this pilot? Sorry.
Well, Kate, before you answer that, Kathy did have a point of clarification. Are we asking for support for the pilot program or for scooters more generally? Like, which one is that?
I would say at least for the pilot study. If you all want to support scooters generally, I think that's up to you. And I can provide some details just on some of the changes, the high-level changes we're going to be making. Also, our 2019 report is available. The evaluation of that is available at milwaukee.gov/scooters. So that could also provide some good background information.
Okay. So how does the current member body feel about that, kind of tying that up into a package so you can review that information and let us know if it's a yay or a nay on those items? What did we say? Friday?
Yeah,
Friday.
I'm going to make a motion now to support the pilot program for the scooters. I think it's worthy of further study, and if that's what the pilot is about, then I think we should support that. So I'll make that motion right now.
And I'll second it.
Everyone approve?
Aye.
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 Okay. So I will jot something up because I know that Kate did share a sort of like a template from a different area of the city, I want to say. And I can, riff off of that so it's a little bit more personalized from this body, and get it to you as soon as possible so we can get it onto the record by Wednesday or before that so it can actually be read. That's probably good, right? Yeah, okay. Does anyone else have any questions for Kate or questions for the member body?
Well, Chris, I will just add that I like the way that you articulated that we as a group, this group promotes anything that's alternative to automobiles, and that's the micromobility aspect of it is a really good point to make. Then saying that how that fits into this study. So I think that's a good way to start the letter.
And I see that Rebecca has a comment here about accessibility, and I just want to make sure we're not ignoring that. You're talking about accessibility, Rebecca, for scooters or bikes or both?
I'm sorry, yes, I didn't clarify scooters, and with the pilot program, as far as support, I would prefer to see what the continuation of the pilot program, because Jim said, you know, James had, there are results in the link that James provided, but if we're going to continue on with the pilot program, I like to see those results instead of full steam ahead supporting just scooters on its own. You know, just let's see what the pilot program shows. I mean, I did get some complaints. I have to say, not as many as I anticipated, to be honest, but just want to see how that all shakes out.
Becky, let's also coordinate offline. I know I owe you a call anyway, just because I believe, you know, there have been some conversations with like the city attorney's office as well. So I just want to make sure that, you know, from a city perspective, we're all on the same page. So let's chat, but we don't want to withhold that from the group, obviously. But, you know, like Claude said, like this definitely needs to make sure that it's being considered and included in the discussion.
I would say too, to personalize that letter, I would really like if there's any intel or things that you feel are really necessary on the matter of the scooter pilot and those more accessibility minded devices that they intend to put in the street. I'd be happy to talk about those things as well. Like Kate said, it doesn't sound like it's you know, an official ADA device that perhaps a purveyor or operator would be putting on the street, but I think it's important for the council to just keep those things in mind as this process moves along. Well, I think we're at a good time. Thanks everyone for keeping everybody on, you know, keeping me on track here. And we have a lot of things to share out with you all. And Angie, do you have your hand raised?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Can I share my screen really quickly?
What is it?
A picture of the youngest member, future member of the task force, sitting on Bob's lap.
Yes, you
Come
may.
on. Thank you.
Come
on. All right, let's see here. Here.
Oh yeah.
There you go.
Look at that mug.
Beautiful.
That's Jake there.
Okay. I love that. He's so interested, like father, like son. Thank you.
I enjoyed watching him put the blanket on your shoulders.
Yeah, that was cool.
Yeah.
That's from Stella.
And I'm wondering about the tie all the way up. Don't you ever relax, Bob?
that'll happen.
All right.
Well,
I'll
with
make
that,
a motion to adjourn.
I will second that.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you. Good night. Have a good
Bye.
evening.
Happy Women's History Month.
Yeah.
Bye. Bye.